October 11, 2025. Emergency services rush to a Brentwood home at 8:08 in the morning. Within hours, the world learns that Diane Keaton, the iconic actress who defined a generation, has passed away at 79. But it's not the announcement that shocks Hollywood. It's what comes next. 2 days later, Woody Allen breaks his silence. At 89 years old, the notoriously private director pens an essay that reveals truths about their relationship he's kept buried for over 5 decades. Truths about why their romance couldn't survive. Truths about the woman who saved his career and defended him when the entire world turned away. And truths about the regrets that haunt him still. They'd known each other for 56 years, made 9 films together. She'd been his muse, his defender, and the love that got away. What Allen finally admits changes everything we thought we understood about one of Hollywood's most complicated relationships. This isn't just a story about a director and his actress. This is about a connection so powerful it couldn't be labeled, so messy it couldn't work as romance, and so real it refused to die for more than half a century. It started with an audition. The year was 1969, and Woody Allen was casting his Broadway play, Play It Again, Sam. He'd seen dozens of actresses, all polished, all professional, all forgettable. Then a 23-year-old California girl walked into the Morosco Theater, and everything changed. Diane Keaton was fresh off a small part in the musical Hair, wearing clothes that didn't quite match, speaking in that distinctive voice that made no logical sense but felt completely authentic. Allen would later write in his tribute essay that when he first saw her, he thought, if Huckleberry Finn was a gorgeous young woman, he'd be Keaton. But there was a problem. She appeared taller than him, and Allen didn't want that dynamic affecting the play's comedy. So like two school kids, Allen and producer David Merrick stood back-to-back with Keaton on the stage of the Morosco Theater, measuring heights. Fortunately, they were exactly the same. She got the part immediately, not just because she fit the physical requirements, but because Allen couldn't imagine not seeing her again. There was something about her that terrified him in the best possible way. She was light where he was dark, optimistic where he was drowning in neurosis, free where he was trapped inside his own mind. Within weeks of the play opening, they were dating. Within months, she'd moved into his apartment. Their friends gave it 6 months maximum. How could it possibly work? He was the tortured intellectual from Brooklyn who dissected every emotion until it lost all meaning. She was the girl who said la-di-da without irony and found joy in the simplest moments. He lived entirely in his head, analyzing, overthinking, controlling. She lived in the present, embracing chaos with open arms. It was a collision of opposites that shouldn't have created anything but wreckage. But for a brief window between 1970 and 1972, it worked. Those years would later be described by Allen's close friends as the happiest of his entire life. With Keaton, he felt something he'd never experienced before. Being seen. Not as Woody Allen the comedian. Not as the emerging filmmaker. Not as the public persona built on neurotic one-liners. She saw Alan Königsberg, the scared kid from Brooklyn who never felt good enough for anything. And somehow when she looked at him with those eyes, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was okay. They'd walk through Central Park for hours. She'd point at clouds, at dogs playing, at children laughing, and find genuine wonder in moments he'd never noticed. He'd never understood people like that. People who could just be happy without needing to understand why. She tried to teach him, tried to show him that life didn't require constant analysis. But his nature wouldn't allow it. You can't teach someone to stop drowning by explaining how water works. Living together revealed the fundamental cracks. Allen was controlling in ways that seemed protective but weren't. He wanted to know where she was constantly, who she talked to, what she was thinking every moment. He'd try to reshape her into something more refined, more intellectual, more like the sophisticated women in European films. He'd correct her grammar, suggest better books, criticize her bizarre fashion choices. But Keaton had a quiet stubbornness that drove him crazy. When he'd correct her speech, she'd smile and repeat the same grammatical error. When he'd recommend Dostoevsky, she'd stick with her photography magazines. When he'd mock her clothes, She'd show up the next day in an even more outrageous combination. It infuriated him. It also made him love her more, because she was the one thing in his controlled universe he couldn't control. Then came 1971, and the moment that would fracture everything. Francis Ford Coppola was casting The Godfather, and through industry connections, Keaton landed an audition for K. Corleone. Alan was dismissive. "It's a gangster movie," he told her. "Not your style. You're doing my film." But something pushed her to audition anyway. Maybe curiosity. Maybe instinct. Maybe the first whisper of rebellion against his constant management of her life. She got the part. Years later, she'd admit to the press that she hadn't even read the full script when she accepted. "How bad is that?" she'd say with that signature laugh. But people close to them understood the real truth. She didn't just need a job. She needed escape. When she told Alan she was taking the role, that she'd be in California for months, that she'd miss his next project, he went cold. Not angry, Alan rarely did anger, just that devastating silence that cut deeper than any argument. "You're choosing Coppola over me," he said finally. "You're choosing them over us." She tried to explain that it wasn't about choosing, that it was about her career, her independence, her life outside of his orbit. But he couldn't hear it. To Alan, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. She left anyway, and something between them shattered that would never fully heal. While filming The Godfather, Keaton met Al Pacino. The chemistry between them wasn't just acting. Pacino was everything Alan wasn't. Physically powerful, emotionally raw, dangerously charismatic. Where Alan intellectualized every feeling, Pacino lived in pure emotion. Where Alan analyzed, Pacino simply existed. And Keaton, who'd spent 2 years being carefully molded by Alan's expectations, found in Pacino a completely different energy. They didn't date during filming, but the attraction was undeniable. Alan could see it in the rushes, in the way she looked at Pacino on screen. Friends say he became obsessed with The Godfather during production, constantly asking mutual acquaintances about the shoot, about Keaton, about her co-stars. He'd probe with his characteristic subtle interrogation, trying to piece together what was happening 3,000 miles away. When she returned to New York, everything had shifted. She was different, more confident, more certain of her own worth, less willing to accept his constant corrections. She'd been directed by Coppola, acted opposite Marlon Brando and Pacino, been part of something monumental. Alan's intellectual comedies suddenly felt smaller by comparison. They tried to continue. She starred in his next films, Sleeper and Love and Death. But the dynamic had fundamentally changed. She wasn't his discovery anymore, his creation, his student. She was a movie star in her own right, and Alan couldn't handle it. The relationship officially ended in 1972, though accounts vary on who ended it. Alan claimed it was mutual. Friends say Keaton walked away. What's certain is that she was exhausted, tired of being analyzed like a psychological case study, tired of being improved, tired of feeling like a project instead of a partner. She wanted to be loved for who she actually was, not who she could become under proper guidance, and Alan couldn't give her that. He loved the idea of her, the character of her, the role she played in his life. But the real Diane, gloriously messy and illogical and free, that terrified him too much. Most relationships end and stay ended. People move on. Time passes. Connections fade. But Woody Allen doesn't work that way. 5 years after their breakup, in 1977, he made Annie Hall. And he made absolutely certain Diane Keaton starred in it. The film wasn't loosely based on their relationship. It was their relationship, recreated scene by scene for the entire world to watch. The arguments were real arguments they'd had. The awkward moments were actual memories. Even the character's name came from her. Annie was her real nickname. Hall was her birth surname before she changed it professionally to Keaton. Allen wrote the part so specifically for her that no other actress could have possibly played it. He even had her wear her own clothes from when they dated. Those iconic oversized men's shirts and vests and ties that would define fashion for a generation. He was putting their entire relationship on screen. Every intimate detail, every private failure, every moment of connection and disconnection. Some called it genius. Others called it exploitation. Keaton herself called it weird and painful in later interviews. But she did it anyway because despite everything, despite the control issues, the emotional manipulation, the way he'd dissected their love like a biology experiment, she still trusted him as a director. She still believed in his artistic vision. And maybe some part of her wanted to preserve what they'd had, even through his distorted lens. Annie Hall became a cultural phenomenon. Best Picture. Best Actress for Keaton. Suddenly the whole world knew their story, or thought they did. But here's what most people missed. The film wasn't true. Alan had rewritten the ending. In real life, their breakup had been messy and painful and unresolved. In Annie Hall, it was bittersweet and philosophical and somehow romantic. He'd taken their failure and made it beautiful, taken her rejection and made it mutual, rewritten history into something more palatable, more artistic, more worthy of his vision. And she let him. Years later, Alan would confess to close friends what Annie Hall really was. Not a love letter, an exorcism. He was trying to purge her from his system, to understand why it hadn't worked, to somehow make peace with losing her. But exorcisms don't always work. Sometimes the ghost stays. Sometimes you're haunted forever. After Annie Hall, something strange happened. Their romantic relationship was dead and buried. But their professional relationship? That was just beginning. Between 1978 and 2020, Diane Keaton appeared in 8 more Woody Allen films. Manhattan in 1979, Manhattan Murder Mystery in 1993, and several others spanning an incredible 42 years. Think about that. 4 decades of working together after the romance ended. 4 decades of him directing her, of them creating art together while maintaining careful emotional distance. 4 decades of an arrangement that made no logical sense but somehow functioned. Friends say there was an unspoken understanding between them. She could have other relationships, other loves, other lives. She dated Al Pacino for 15 turbulent years, had a 5-year romance with Warren Beatty that began during their filming of Reds in 1981, connected with Jack Nicholson during Something's Gotta Give. But on film, in Alan's world, she was still his, and he needed that. He admitted as much to a friend once, in a rare moment of vulnerability. I make films for an audience of one, Diane Keaton. Every other actress was compared to her. Every other performance measured against the standards she'd set. He'd work with brilliant women over the decades, Mia Farrow, Diane Weist, Scarlett Johansson, Cate Blanchett. But none of them were Diane. None of them had that specific magic that made his words come alive in ways even he hadn't imagined. This strange arrangement took its toll, particularly on her relationship with Al Pacino. Their on-again, off-again romance lasted from 1974 to 1990, and throughout it all, Alan was there, not physically, but as a presence, a shadow, a constant comparison. She'd leave to shoot a Woody Allen film, come back talking about Woody's genius, Woody's vision, Woody's brilliance, and Pacino, secure as he was, found himself competing with something he couldn't fight. How do you compete with someone who's already lost? Alan had already lost her romantically, so there was no threat. But emotionally, creatively, that connection remained unbreakable. According to recent reports following Keaton's death, Pacino's biggest regret is never marrying her. He'd wanted commitment, wanted her complete attention. She couldn't give it, not because she didn't love him. Friends say she was absolutely mad for him, but because some part of her remained tied to Alan in ways she couldn't explain or escape. The question everyone asked was, why did she never marry anyone? She dated some of Hollywood's most eligible men. Pacino, Beatty, Nicholson, legends who would have married her in a heartbeat. Yet she remained single her entire life. In interviews, she'd give various explanations. She watched her mother sacrifice her dreams for family. She needed independence. She was an oddball. But people close to her suspected something deeper. She adopted 2 children in her 50s, daughter Dexter in 1996, son Duke in 2001, and became a devoted single mother. She clearly wanted family, just not marriage. Perhaps because the one man she'd lived with, The one who'd tried to reshape her into his ideal had shown her what marriage might mean. Perhaps because after Alan, she'd never again let anyone have that kind of control. Perhaps because loving Woody Allen, even briefly, had taught her that some connections can't be captured by traditional structures. Then came 2014, and everything changed. Dylan Farrow's accusations against Woody Allen resurfaced publicly. The details were devastating. The allegations horrific. Hollywood began its immediate distancing. Actors who'd worked with him issued statements. Directors who'd admired him went silent. Awards organizations stopped honoring him. By 2018, with the Me Too movement at full force, Allen had become Hollywood's pariah. Everyone abandoned him. Everyone except Diane Keaton. In January 2018, she posted something on Twitter that would define the rest of her public life. "Woody Allen is my friend, and I continue to believe him." Just 13 words that destroyed relationships, cost her roles, and made her a target of fury. Judd Apatow attacked her publicly. Dylan Farrow's supporters called her an enabler. Think pieces declared her disappointingly complicit. She lost work immediately. Films that would have cast her went elsewhere. Directors who'd wanted to collaborate suddenly couldn't make it happen. Friends in the industry stopped calling. She became almost as controversial as Allen himself, but she wouldn't back down. In 2023, 5 years into the controversy, she gave an interview that made things worse. When asked if working with Allen overshadowed her career, she said firmly, "No, not at all. I'm proud. I'm proud beyond measure." Then she made a comment that sparked immediate outrage. She dismissed what she called survivor culture, adding, "You got to get over it." The backlash was brutal and swift. But she didn't apologize, didn't clarify, didn't walk it back. What made her so fiercely, stubbornly, almost self-destructively loyal to a man she hadn't even dated in over 50 years? Allen never asked her to defend him, never requested her support, never demanded her loyalty. She gave it freely, knowing exactly what it would cost. Because after knowing him for 5 decades, after seeing him at his worst and his best, after being in his life more consistently than almost anyone, she looked at the accusations and didn't believe them. Maybe she was wrong, maybe her loyalty was misplaced, but it was real, it was chosen. She knew the price and paid it willingly. Throughout 2024, Diane Keaton's health was declining. She kept it intensely private, hidden even from close friends. There were subtle signs for those paying attention. Weight loss, a frail appearance in rare public photos, canceled projects without explanation. But she made no announcements, prepared no one. On October 11, 2025, emergency services arrived at her Brentwood home at 8:08 a.m. She was transported to a local hospital and pronounced dead. She was 79 years old. The official announcement came hours later. The cause of death wasn't initially revealed, just that it had been sudden. Days later, her death certificate would show bacterial pneumonia, though friends claimed she'd been battling a mystery illness beforehand. When Woody Allen received the call, sources say he went completely silent. "I didn't even know she was sick," he reportedly said. How is that possible? For someone he'd known 56 years, someone he'd worked with 9 times, someone who'd defended him when the entire world turned away. He hadn't known she was dying. That absence of knowledge, that gap in awareness, crushed him. He'd been so consumed by his own isolation, his own pariah status, his own battles, that he'd failed to see she was fighting something far worse. The funeral was small and private, just family and a handful of close friends. Allen attended, masked and hunched, looking every one of his 89 years. He brought something that made several attendees cry. A photograph from 1970, one of him and Keaton on the set of Play It Again, Sam. They're both genuinely laughing in it, the kind of laughter that comes from pure joy rather than performance. He'd had it framed. Meryl Streep, who attended the service, later told a friend that Allen couldn't stop crying. Not quiet, dignified tears, deep, body-shaking sobs. She'd never seen him like that. Nobody had. Woody Allen was famous for his emotional control, his ability to intellectualize feelings into submission. But confronted with Diane's death, all of that collapsed. 2 days after her death, On October 13, 2025, Allen published an essay in the Free Press. In it, he finally said things he'd kept buried for decades. "It's grammatically incorrect to say 'most unique,'" he wrote, "but all rules of grammar, and I guess anything else, are suspended when talking about Diane Keaton. Unlike anyone the planet has experienced, or is unlikely to ever see again, her face and laugh illuminated any space she entered." He remembered their first meeting, how she'd seemed taller, how they'd measured heights like school kids. He wrote about their relationship with brutal honesty. "She was shy, I was shy, and with two shy people things can get pretty dull." But the most revealing part came when he addressed their breakup. "Only God and Freud know why we split," he wrote. Even after all these years, he claimed not to fully understand it. But the truth leaked through anyway. In conversations with friends following her death, Allen admitted things he'd never said publicly. "I was too controlling and she was too free. I tried to remake her into something more manageable, and she resisted by being more herself. I loved her, but I loved the idea of controlling her more. That's not love. That's ownership." And she was right to leave. About Annie Hall, he confessed something that recontextualizes the entire film. "I gave her the Oscar, but she gave me everything else. The film, the career, the credibility, the soul of my work. Without her, I'm just another neurotic making comedies about neurotics. With her, I was creating something real." About the other women in his life, he was equally frank. "I loved Mia differently, Soon-Yi differently, all of them differently. But Diane, I loved her most honestly. She saw the real me, the pathetic, insecure, damaged me, and she stayed anyway. Until she couldn't anymore because I made it impossible." His biggest regret at 89, facing his own mortality? "I should have just let her be," he keeps telling friends. "I should have just loved her the way she was instead of trying to make her into what I thought she should be. I should have been grateful for the miracle of her instead of trying to improve it." About her defense of him during the accusations, his response reveals everything. "She believed me when nobody else would. She stood by me when it cost her career, her reputation, her relationships. She didn't have to do that. I never asked her to. But she did it anyway, because that's who she was. Loyal, stubborn, convinced of what she believed." There's also his reflection on their last conversation, which happened months before her death. They'd talk occasionally over the years, brief phone calls checking in, surface level usually. But this time was different. She'd called him, which was rare, and she'd said something that stayed with him. "I don't regret any of it. The relationship, the films, defending you, none of it. I was who I was, and you were who you were, and it was what it was." Allen recounted this to a friend, adding, "That's very her, you know, not analyzing it to death, just accepting it." At 89 years old, what does Woody Allen want people to understand about Diane Keaton? That she was right about everything. About him, about life, about not overthinking. That Annie Hall wasn't the truth about their relationship, but his fantasy version of it. That she was a better person than any character he ever wrote. That she saved him far more than he ever saved her, despite what their films might suggest. 56 years, 9 films, one enduring, complicated, impossible connection. That's the story of Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. Not a romance in the traditional sense. Not exactly a friendship either. But something more complicated and more real than either. She was his muse, his conscience, his defender, and the one who got away. He was her mentor, her tormentor, and the man she never fully left even after leaving him. The irony isn't lost on anyone. She never married, dated some of Hollywood's most legendary men, but stayed loyal longest to the one who couldn't hold on to her. And he, famous for his relationships with younger women, for moving on quickly and completely, never quite got over the California girl who walked into that audition in 1969. What their relationship really was defies easy description. Too messy to be romance, too intimate to be friendship, too unresolved to be past, too painful to be present. It was something that exists outside normal definitions, something only they fully understood. Now Allen is 89, alone with his memories and his regrets, and the knowledge that he can never tell her the things he finally understands. She's gone, and with her, goes the last connection to a version of himself he barely recognizes now. The young, ambitious director who thought he could shape the world to his vision. Who thought love was about molding someone into your ideal? Who thought control and care were the same thing? Diane Keaton's legacy extends far beyond the films, the Oscar, the iconic style. She was the woman who defined Woody Allen on screen and off, who gave his work its heart, who stood by him when standing by him meant standing alone. And maybe that's the truest thing about their relationship. She saw him clearly, every flaw, every failure, every weakness, and she didn't turn away. Not when they dated, not when they broke up, not when the world demanded it. She stayed herself, stubbornly, completely, authentically herself, and in doing so, gave him something he spent his whole life trying to capture on film: the miracle of being loved exactly as you are. In Hollywood's long history, there's never been anything quite like Woody and Diane. Some loves are too complicated to work, but too powerful to end. Some relationships refuse to fit into any category we understand. They proved that. They lived it, and they left us with art, questions, and a story that will outlast them both. A story about what happens when two people connect so deeply that even breaking apart can't truly separate them. A story about loyalty that costs everything, and a story about regrets that come only when it's finally too late to make them right. What do you think about their relationship? Was her loyalty admirable or misguided? Should Allen have fought harder to keep her, or was letting her go the only honest choice he ever made? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as compelling as we did, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's most complicated relationships. Because sometimes the most important love stories are the ones that never got a happy ending.